My grandson shoved me into the lake and laughed while I was drowning. "Don't be so dramatic, Grandpa," he said as I kicked and gasped for air. 19 years old, and he treated my life like a joke. I saw my son, his father, watching from the dock, arms folded. My daughter-in-law is sipping her wine, smirking. Not one of them moved. Not one hand reached out. They let me thrash, choking while the water filled my lungs. I was 65, too old, too frail after surgery, and they looked at me like I was nothing. That was the moment I realized they weren't waiting for me to survive. They were waiting to see if I would sink. But they forgot something. I don't sink. I endure. And one day soon, they'll see exactly what that means. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The shock of that water cut through me like glass. My chest locked, my shoulders screamed with pain the doctor had warned me about, and every instinct told me to let go, to give in. Yet something older than fear kept me fighting the stubborn breath of a man who's been underestimated one time too many. When my head finally broke the surface, coughing, sputtering, eyes burning, I looked back at the dock. Jason stood there, tall, cocky, with that grin people mistake for charm, but I knew was cruelty disguised. His friends beside him laughed. One even clapped. And then I saw my son Mark. My only son. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't even flinch. His arms were crossed like he was watching some routine show, waiting for the next act. And Linda, his wife, raised her wine glass like it was a toast, her lips curling into that polished smile she saves for company. "Guess you can swim after all," Jason called down when I clawed onto the dock's edge. Tough old man. The laughter that followed was worse than the water in my lungs. It clung echoing as if the whole lake had chosen sides against me. I dragged myself up my knees, scraped raw against the wooden planks, my shirt clinging heavy with the weight of betrayal. No hand came down to help me. No towel offered, no word of concern, just silence and smirks. I didn't speak. I didn't ask why. I simply stood, dripping my breath ragged, and walked past them all. Past the grill, smoking with burgers that no one offered me. Past the folding chairs where they lounged as though nothing had happened. My footsteps left wet prints across the deck, but not one of them followed. Inside the house, the air was cool, almost mocking after the suffocating lake. I went straight to the small bathroom off the kitchen, locked the door, and stared into the mirror. The face that looked back wasn't the man I remembered. My gray hair plastered flat, my eyes red from lake water skin, pale and sagging against the years. I looked like a ghost in my own house. I pressed both palms against the sink water dripping from my sleeves and whispered, "Is this who I am to them? A ghost they can laugh at." I could still hear Jason's laugh, high and sharp like the crack of something breaking. It wasn't just the laugh of a teenager, it was the laugh of a boy who had been taught that cruelty was clever, that disrespect was strength. And who had taught him that? Not me. I thought back uninvited to the years when Jason was small. He used to run barefoot through my yard, clutching wildflowers in his tiny fists, handing them to me as if he had plucked treasure. "Grandpa, you're the best part of this house," he once told me, his little head pressing against my chest. That boy was gone, replaced by someone who could shove me into a lake and grin while I fought for breath. And the truth I had been avoiding for years rose like bile. I hadn't just lost my grandson. I had raised him in the absence of his distracted parents. I had fed him, clothed him, sat by his bed during asthma attacks, and bought him a second-hand guitar when he dreamed of music. I gave him my time, my savings, my love. And somewhere along the line, they taught him to spit it back at me. I peeled off my soaked shirt, found a towel, the one I kept for guests that no one else ever touched, and dried myself slowly. Each scrape on my knee, each ache in my shoulder was a reminder, not of weakness, but of clarity. When I stepped back into the kitchen, they were already laughing about something else. Vacation plans, Cancun, some resort Linda had circled in a glossy brochure. Jason scrolled on his phone, leaving wet footprints across my floor without a thought. Mark leaned against the counter, sipping lemonade I had made that very morning. I sat at the edge of the breakfast table, still damp, still trembling, but invisible to them. Not one glance, not one question. It wasn't new, just louder now. I let the silence stretch, thick and choking, to see if anyone would notice. They didn't. So I stood quiet and walked down the hall to my bedroom. On the edge of the bed where I once read Jason bedtime stories, I sat towel draped across my shoulders. The lake water was gone from my skin, but not from my heart. That stayed heavy like all the other times I'd been left out, when they forgot my birthday, when they asked for money without thanks, when they mocked my old-fashioned ways. The push into the lake was just the first time they did it in public. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out my journal. Its pages had been empty for months, but tonight my hand trembled with purpose. On the first line I wrote, "They will never get the chance to drown me again." Later that night, after the house had gone still, I sat at my desk under the soft hum of a lamp. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's smirk, heard his laugh. And worse, I saw Mark standing there silent, complicit. I wanted to scream, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. How had we gotten here? When had I become disposable? My mind ran back over the years, piecing it together, the small dismissals, the jokes at my expense, the way Linda rolled her eyes when I told old stories, the way Mark brushed off my advice. They'd been nudging me toward the edge for years. Jason just gave the final shove. But as the night deepened, something inside me hardened. I realized I had a choice. I could keep playing the role they'd written for me, quiet, compliant, convenient, or I could pick up the pen and write my ending. The next morning I walked through the kitchen, my steps steady despite the ache in my bones. Jason barely looked up from his phone. Mark muttered a good morning without eye contact. Linda was already planning another dinner with her friends, her voice bright and hollow. I poured myself coffee, sat at the table, and watched them. Watched every careless word, every dismissive glance. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. What I felt was colder, quieter. Resolve. I opened my journal again, and under that first line I wrote, "This silence is not weakness. It's a warning." That was the day I stopped making excuses for them. The day I stopped clinging to memories of who Jason used to be. And the day I decided they would see, not through yelling, not through fists, but through absence, through clarity, through the weight of what I could take away. They thought they were watching me sink, but they hadn't seen anything yet. The morning after the barbecue, I found myself standing in front of the old guitar, leaning against the corner of the living room. The strings were dusty, one of them long since snapped, but I still remembered the day I brought it home. Jason was 10. His eyes lit up like I had just handed him the moon. He sat cross-legged on the floor, strumming clumsy chords, and told me, "Grandpa, this is better than Christmas." Now, years later, the same boy had shoved me into a lake and laughed while I fought for breath. I reached out, ran my fingers across the rough wood, and felt the weight of both memories pressing down at once. The joy of the past, the sting of the present. That guitar was more than an instrument. It was a reminder of every sacrifice I'd made to give him a chance at something better. I used to believe love was enough, that if you poured your heart into a child, it would shield them from the harshness of the world. But I learned the hard way it can also be twisted, taken for granted, and turned into entitlement. When Jason was 6, Mark had lost his job. Linda was restless already, complaining about money, about being stuck. They dropped Jason off at my house for a few weeks. Those few weeks became months. Months became years. By the time Jason was in middle school, I was the one signing his report cards, sitting through parent-teacher meetings, and paying for braces. I didn't mind. I told myself it was my duty, my blessing even. I had the time, I had the patience, and most of all, I had love to give. Back then, Jason would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching his blanket, whispering, "Don't let go, Grandpa." And I never did. Not once. But somewhere between that frightened little boy and the young man who stood on the dock last night, something changed. I can almost pinpoint it. The year he turned 16. He stopped looking me in the eye. Stopped saying thank you. Stopped joining me at the table for breakfast. The phone became his new companion, glowing in his hand long after midnight. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I was too old-fashioned. Maybe I didn't understand what kids his age went through. But deep down I noticed the shift, the smirk when I told stories, the roll of his eyes when I asked about school, the way he dismissed me like background noise. And Mark, he never corrected him. If anything, he encouraged it, laughing along when Jason mocked me. Linda, polished and perfect in her social circle, made it worse. She'd say things like, "Oh, Dad gets confused sometimes," even when she knew I hadn't. Each little jab chipped away at Jason's respect until there was none left to find. The worst part, I let it happen. I told myself not to rock the boat. I told myself it was just teenage mood swings. I told myself he'd grow out of it. I wanted so badly to keep the peace that I swallowed my pride, buried my hurt, and hoped. Hope is a dangerous thing when it blinds you to reality. I should have spoken up the first time Jason rolled his eyes at me in front of his friends. I should have corrected him when he called me old man instead of grandpa. I should have drawn the line when Linda told people at church that I was slipping. Instead, I smiled through it. Let them believe I didn't notice. Let Jason think he was clever. And in doing so, I disappeared slowly, silently from my own family. I sat down on the couch, the guitar across my lap, and strummed one of the few chords I still remembered. The sound was hollow, flat, nothing like the bright tones Jason once pulled from it. The memory came rushing back anyway. Jason at 11, his fingers too small to press the strings properly, but determination shining in his eyes. "I'm gonna be a musician one day, Grandpa. I'm gonna make you proud." I smiled, then told him I already was proud. Now I wondered, did he even remember saying that? Did he remember the nights we stayed up late, me scribbling down chords for him to practice? Did he remember the money I scraped together skipping a vacation I desperately needed just to make sure he had what he wanted? Or had those memories faded, replaced by the poisonous lessons he learned from his parents? That image matters more than kindness. That cruelty is confidence. That family is just another stepping stone. The sound of laughter drifted in from the kitchen, pulling me out of the past. Jason laughed again, sharp and cruel, echoing down the hallway. Trigger. I set the guitar aside, my hands trembling not from age but from the weight of realization. Jason hadn't changed overnight. I had watched it happen inch by inch, year by year, and chosen silence every time. And silence had delivered me here, shoved into a lake, laughed at by the boy I once carried on my shoulders. I walked back to my room, closed the door, and sat at the desk where his old school projects were still stacked in a box. Construction paper covered in messy handwriting, stick figure drawings, and essays about what he wanted to be when he grew up. One in particular caught my eye. "When I grow up, I want to build machines that help people breathe better. I want to help people like my grandpa who sometimes gets tired." I held that paper in my hands until it shook. The boy who wrote those words was gone. In his place stood a young man who laughed as I drowned. I folded the paper, carefully placed it back in the box, and sat in silence. That silence used to be mistaken for weakness. Not anymore. This time it was a promise. Later at dinner, I joined them at the table. Mark was talking about flights to Mexico. Linda scrolled through rental properties. Jason sat scrolling on his phone, earbuds dangling. I cleared my throat, so I said, my voice steady. Mark looked up surprised. "So what, Dad?" I forced a thin smile. "Nothing, just seeing if anyone was listening." Jason chuckled without looking up. "We hear you, old man." The words slid across the table like a blade. But instead of cutting me down, they carved something new inside me, resolve sharper than any insult. I sipped my water, set the glass down gently, and let their chatter wash over me. They didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath their feet had begun to shift. That night, before I went to bed, I opened my journal again. On the next line beneath, "They will never get the chance to drown me again," I wrote. He stopped being my grandson long before he pushed me into the lake. The night after I wrote my first line in that journal, I couldn't sleep. The words stared back at me in the glow of the lamp. "They will never get the chance to drown me again." I closed the book, but the silence in my room pressed heavily against me. Sleep wouldn't come. Not when my head was filled with their laughter. Jason's smirk, Mark's folded arms, Linda's glass of wine. So instead, I pulled out the drawer of my desk and opened my old laptop. The screen lit up slowly, wheezing to life like even the machine was tired of being ignored. I typed in my password, something Jason would never guess, an old Army serial number from when I was barely older than he is now. For years, I'd kept neat digital ledgers of everything. Not because anyone asked me to, but because it mattered to me to know exactly where my money was, where my time went, what I had built for this family. Click by click, I scrolled through the folders. Bank accounts, bonds, the education fund I'd started when Jason was 10, back when he still looked at me like I was a hero. There it was. $50,000 untouched. A foundation for his future, I used to call it. A future I once believed he'd build with decency. Now it felt like an anchor tied around my ankle. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of floorboards. I thought I was alone, but then I heard it. Jason's voice, low, muffled, drifting down the hallway. I paused, hands frozen on the keyboard. "College funds basically mine," he was saying. My stomach clenched. I eased the laptop shut, careful not to make a sound, and listened harder. His voice carried through the thin wall between my room and the living room, where he had probably collapsed on the couch again. "Once the old man's gone, Dad says it's set. That's like, what, 50 grand easy? I'll transfer once he's out of the picture. My blood turned cold. Out of the picture. That's what I was to him. A picture. Something to be removed, discarded, hung on a wall if convenient, but erased when it cluttered the space. I sat back in my chair, hands trembling, not from age this time, but from the shock of hearing my grandson plot my absence like it was nothing more than a math problem. For years I had blamed myself for his change. Maybe I was too soft, too patient, too willing to overlook small slights. But in that moment I understood Jason didn't just slip away. He was pulled, shaped, taught, by a father who never learned accountability, by a mother who measured value in image and money, and now by his greed. I opened the journal again, scribbled furiously beneath last night's vow. They think I'm a fund to be transferred. They forget I'm still the one holding the pen. The pen. That small, simple instrument suddenly felt heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. In ink, I had control. In ink, I could shift the ground beneath their feet without raising my voice. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. The routine was almost laughable, like we were still a family sharing something ordinary. Jason stumbled in, yawning, phone in hand. He didn't even look at me, just grabbed a plate, scooped eggs onto it, and dropped into a chair. Morning, I said evenly. Yeah, he mumbled, scrolling through whatever kept him tethered to that screen more than to real people. I watched him eat, slouched, bored, already moving on from last night's cruelty like it never happened. Mark joined a few minutes later, dressed for work. He didn't like his tie crooked. Linda followed, immaculate as always, perfume filling the kitchen. Dad, could you, Mark began, but I cut him off with a look. Not today, I said quietly. He blinked, confused, then shrugged. He wasn't used to me drawing lines. He was used to me saying yes. After they left, I sat at the table alone. The eggs were cold, untouched. I opened the paper, but the words blurred. Instead, I heard Jason's voice again. Once the old man's gone, I wrote those words down in my journal, circled them twice. Then I underlined gone. They thought my disappearance was inevitable, natural, a matter of time. But what they hadn't counted on was me choosing the terms. That afternoon, I went to the attic. It smelled of dust and cedar, full of boxes no one had touched in years. I pulled down a tin container where I'd kept documents, birth certificates, property deeds, and insurance papers. My hands traced each folder carefully, like I was reacquainting myself with old comrades. At the bottom was the trust document, the one I had signed after my surgery, the one that ensured Jason's education fund. I read it slowly, word by word, the way I used to read bedtime stories aloud. Only this time there was no wonder, no magic, just a cold clarity. The fund was in my name. The control was mine. No transfer could be made without my signature. Jason's confidence wasn't based on fact. It was based on an assumption. On entitlement. That was his weakness. And I intended to let him believe it, let him dig the hole deeper until he couldn't climb out. That evening, Linda hosted a casual dinner for a few friends. Yoga classmates, neighbors. The kind of gathering where she liked to perform her role as the perfect hostess. Her smile rehearsed her comments, sharp but disguised as wit. I stayed mostly in the kitchen, wiping counters that didn't need wiping. But I listened. I always listened. Through the laughter and clinking glasses, I caught Jason's voice again, bragging. Grandpa fell in the lake yesterday, flailing around like some turtle on its back. You should have seen it. Hilarious. A roar of laughter followed. I gripped the counter until my knuckles whitened, and then Linda, lowering her voice just enough to sound like a confidant, but loud enough for me to hear, he's becoming a liability. I told Mark we can't drag this out. We need to think about the future, not sentiment. Liability. That word settled in my chest heavier than the lake water had. I wanted to storm in. Wanted to remind them of the nights I stayed up with Jason's asthma, of the checks I wrote to keep the roof over their heads, of the meals I cooked, the lawns I mowed, the sacrifices I never tallied. But I didn't. Instead, I dried my hands on a towel, turned off the kitchen light, and walked to my room. Because rage was what they expected. Silence was what they dismissed. But silence in the right hands can be sharper than rage. Back in my room, I pulled the journal close. My handwriting was slower this time, deliberate, each letter pressed deep into the page. They mock my struggle. They call me a liability. But the liability is theirs, and they don't even see it yet. I underlined theirs, closed the book. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. The morning after Linda's dinner party, I brewed coffee stronger than usual. My hands still trembled, not from weakness, but from the memory of their laughter spilling through the sliding glass doors while they called me a liability. The house was quiet now. Jason had gone out late and hadn't returned. Mark left early for work. Linda lingered upstairs, probably scrolling through vacation rentals, pretending she deserved the life she flaunted. I stood at the kitchen sink staring out at the lake that had nearly swallowed me. The surface was calm now, mirror-like, but it mocked me all the same. A few ripples drifted across as though whispering, "You survived. But what will you do now?" A knock at the side door broke the silence. Not the front, never the front. Only one person ever came through the side without hesitation. I opened it to find Frank Dawson, my oldest friend. Frank didn't ask permission. He never had to. He pushed the door open with his elbow, balancing a brown paper bag in one hand and 2 styrofoam cups in the other. "Morning, Ed," he said, squinting at me over his thick glasses. "You look like hell." "Nice to see you too," I muttered, though the corner of my mouth almost smiled. "Sit," he ordered, already dropping the bag on the table. "I'll pour." I obeyed mostly because that's what you did with Frank. He was a retired sergeant, and though his uniform was long gone, the command never left his voice. He handed me a cup, black coffee steaming. "Drink, then talk." I stared into the dark liquid, buying time. Finally, I said, "They pushed me." His brows shot up. Into the lake I nodded once. "Jesus, Ed." He leaned back, whistling low. "And nobody helped you?" "They laughed," I said flatly. Silence hung heavy between us, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Frank tapped his fingers on the table, slow and deliberate. "Then it's time," he said. I frowned. "Time for what?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, slid it across the table like a poker hand. Inside was a card-clean font, no nonsense. Thomas Green Estate Law. I looked up sharply. "You kept this." "I keep everything," Frank said, "especially when my best friend is handing out his legacy like Halloween candy to people who'd rather watch him drown." I let the card rest in my hand. The paper felt heavier than it should have. "I don't know, Frank," I said quietly. "It feels so final." "You want final," he shot back. "You just don't want guilt. That's different." I rubbed my temple. I wanted to help Jason. I wanted him to have chances I never did. "And you gave him those chances," Frank said firmly. "You paid for braces, soccer trips. Hell, you even bought that damn guitar he never touches anymore. You let Mark and Linda live here rent-free one whole summer, remember? And you still had to buy your groceries that August." I winced. I had almost forgotten that. "I wanted to help," I whispered. "I know you did," Frank said, his voice softening. "You're better than them. That's the problem." We sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee. Outside, the lake shimmered deceptively peaceful. Finally, Frank leaned forward. "Listen, Ed. You don't need revenge. You need release. There's a difference." I stared at him, the words sinking in. Release. That was the word. I didn't want to hurt them. I wanted to stop being hurt by them. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. "Start here," Frank said, tapping the card. "Call Green. Tell him the truth. Every ugly detail. Let him guide you." My chest tightened. "If I do this, Frank, it means cutting Jason out." Frank's eyes didn't waver. "Kid cut himself out the moment he shoved you in that lake." The truth landed heavy, undeniable. I closed my eyes, the memory flashing again. Jason's grin, the cold shock, the silence of my son and daughter-in-law. When I opened them, Frank was watching me steadily. "You're not alone, Ed," he said. "Not anymore. You've got me, and you've got this pen in your hand." I realized I was clutching my journal, still open on the table. The ink from last night glistened faintly in the light. They mock my struggle. They call me a liability. But the liability is theirs, and they don't even see it yet. A vibration rattled on the table. My phone face down. I turned it over. A notification from the voicemail box. "Missed call. Unknown number." I played it. "Mr. Miller, this is Thomas Green's office returning your inquiry. We can set an appointment this week if you're available. Please call back." I looked at Frank, stunned. He smiled faintly. "I may have nudged the process along." "You called him, I told you," Frank said, leaning back with a grin. "I keep everything, including promises I made to your wife before she passed. She told me once, if Ed ever forgets his worth, remind him. So here I am. For a long moment I couldn't speak. My throat-closed eyes stung. The mention of my late wife Margaret always pierced through the armor. She'd believed in me when no one else had. Damn it, Frank, I muttered, blinking hard. Don't thank me, he said, standing. Thank yourself when you finally stop letting them write your story. He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. Call Green. Today. And then he left side door closing softly behind him, leaving the scent of strong coffee and old loyalty lingering in the air. I sat alone again, staring at the card in my hand. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt armed. That afternoon, I dialed the number. The line clicked. Law offices of Thomas Green. A crisp voice answered. My mouth was dry, but I forced the words out. This is Edward Miller. I need an appointment. When I hung up, I looked out the window at the lake once more. The water was calm again, but I knew better. Beneath the surface, currents shifted, ready to pull. And this time, I wouldn't be the one dragged under. Thomas Green's office smelled like paper and consequence. Not the stale kind, the kind that says everything you sign here will outlive the people who think they can out-talk it. The windows faced east, taking a slice of late morning sun and laying it across a row of framed degrees. His receptionist, a calm woman with steel-gray hair and a nameplate that read, Nora Vance, walked me in, offered water, and closed the door behind me with a soft click that felt like a seal. Thomas stood. Mr. Miller, he said, crossing the rug with a hand already extended. I'm Green. Thank you for coming on short notice. His handshake wasn't perfunctory. It was steady, dry, present, the kind that makes you feel seen without being studied. I realized how long it had been since I'd shaken a hand that didn't want something. Call me Edward, I said. Or Ed, if that makes it easier to tell me hard things. He smiled the way good lawyers do, kindness wrapped around an unblinking kernel of truth. All right, Ed. Please. He gestured to a chair. Let's talk. I sat. The leather didn't creak. I liked that. He didn't ease in. You mentioned on the phone you have a grandson, Jason, and that there's an education fund in your name. 50,000, I said, set aside when he was 10. Untouched. He nodded, already knowing, which told me Frank had told him enough to start. Thomas opened a thin folder. I saw my signatures copied, their dates I remembered like birthdays, the day I chose to believe in a boy who brought me dandelions like gold. Is access still solely yours? He asked. Yes, I swallowed. They assume otherwise. His eyes lifted. Assume how my grandson told someone it's his. My son Jason's father speaks like the future's already written. My daughter-in-law uses words like liability. I forced the word out. Even here it tasted like metal. Thomas didn't write that down. He let the word hang where it belonged in the room between us. Okay, he said softly. Then there are two conversations we can have. One is about money. The other is about boundaries. They look similar on paper. Which one keeps me breathing, I asked. Both, he said. He clicked a pen. The quiet sound felt ceremonial. First he said, let's lock the front doors that don't exist. He turned his notepad so I could see his list forming. We'll audit every account. We'll move anything that requires your signature into a structure that doubles the friction, no e-signature after 48 hours, no online access without an in-person token. We'll add alerts so any inquiry on your accounts, any pings me. We'll set your credit to frozen at all 3 bureaus. We'll get you a safe deposit box at a credit union under your key. We'll create a new mailing address for financial correspondence. If they're counting on drift, we take away the tide. It was clinical, clean, and lawful. It calmed me in a way the lake never could. And second, I asked. He held my eyes. We draw your life in ink the way you want it lived. Power of attorney, medical and financial, to someone you trust. Healthcare directive witnessed. A revised will with a no contest clause. A letter of intent I will read to any interested party at your request, or when you instruct me to do it without you in the room. I breathed out slowly. Margaret's voice came back. If you're going to be quiet, make sure the paper speaks. I want Frank as my healthcare proxy, I said. And if he can't, Nora next. Not Mark. Not Linda. Thomas wrote, then paused, then wrote more. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He flipped to a fresh page. Tell me about Jason. I did. Not everything. Enough. The guitar, the asthma nights, the dandelions, the shove. When I finished, Thomas's pen hadn't moved for a long time. He let the silence land. He knew it was part of the record. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't perfunctory either. I don't want revenge, I said. I want release. His mouth curved. Frank's phrasing wasn't new to him. Then we'll structure the release. One piece at a time. He tapped the first list with his pen. I'll have my office call the credit bureaus today. You'll stop at Glenview Credit Union after you leave me and open a safe deposit box. Store originals there. We'll set a P.O. box. You'll change your primary phone on file with banks to a number only you and I have. We'll order a physical security token for the education fund account. No token, no movement. And the fund itself, I asked. You tell me, he said. Close it, redirect it, freeze it. Or he lifted a brow. Let it sit where it is while you watch what people do when they think time is on their side. I want to watch, I said. The words were colder than I expected them to be, but they fit my mouth. I want to see how they treat me when they think I'm leaving, but I'm the one choosing the door. Then we leave it, he said, and we build the room around it. He scribbled a title on the page, The Room. It made me smile despite myself. You'll keep your journal, he said. Dates, times, facts. Not feelings, your feelings matter, but in law, facts move the needle. If anyone calls you confused, we will outdo their certainty. My daughter-in-law's friends already whisper the word I said. They like diagnosis as gossip. Thomas slid a pamphlet across the desk. Not glossy, not a sales pitch, just clear text. Then we test the room while you're in it, he said. Capacity screening. Not mandatory. But if you want to preempt their narrative, we invite a neutral evaluator to meet you here. No fanfare. We put the letter in the file. If anyone says facility again, I can fax a sentence. Mr. Miller demonstrates decisional capacity. It's not ammunition. It's a seat belt. I laughed short and surprised. I was an engineer. I like seat belts. Good, he said. We'll buckle more. Nora knocked, poked her head in politely, and set a glass of water by my elbow. Bureaus are on hold, she told Thomas, then glanced toward me. Can I make you copies of your ID now, Mr. Miller? You can, I said. Thank you, Nora. She took my wallet like it was heavy, not because of cash, but because of what it meant to hand it across. When the door closed, I realized my hands weren't trembling, not the way they had in the kitchen gripping a counter while my family laughed outside. Ed Thomas said, drawing my attention back, I want to share something you should know. I pulled the inquiry history on your fund. He slid a printout across the desk. Last month, before your call, someone contacted the custodian labeled as authorized family to ask about required steps in the event of incapacity. The caller ID belonged to your son. The room didn't tilt. My stomach didn't drop. A month ago it would have. Today the information fell into place like a piece of a machine clicking home. Thomas watched my face for the rupture. When it didn't come, he nodded as if we'd passed a test together. They didn't get anywhere, he said. Your documents list no authorized family. The custodian told them they would need a court-ordered guardianship to move anything. It's not nothing. It tells us intent. That's all. That's enough, I said. And I wasn't sure whether I meant for him to stop talking or that the facts were sufficient to explain everything I didn't want to believe. Thank you. Do you want me to send a letter to Mark? He asked, putting him on notice that any further attempts to access your accounts will be documented. Not yet, I said. Let them keep thinking I'm not watching. I want the rope they're so eager to throw. I want to see what they do with it. Understood, he said, and I believed he did. We moved through the list like men repairing a bridge in daylight. He dictated. Nora returned. Forms appeared uneventfully, the way critical things do when professionals handle them. I initialed where the yellow flags told me to. I signed where the lines did what my life asked. I named Frank as my medical agent. I added a second clause that would have made Margaret proud. In the event of my incapacity, my healthcare agent shall be the only person consulted on placement. Not Mark, not Linda, not the woman at Linda's yoga class with a cousin in admissions. We added a no-contest clause to a draft will. If an heir challenges and loses, they lose whatever remains. Thomas said, it won't prevent rage, it prevents collection. What about the house, I asked, picturing the lake through the kitchen window, the one gentle thing the water had offered me for years. You're attached, he said, not as a warning, as a kindness. I am, I admitted. But I'm not letting it become a trophy in someone else's story. He nodded. Then you have options. Life estate to yourself, deed to a community land trust upon your passing, or sale with proceeds earmarked to a foundation you name now. We don't have to file that deed today. We can draw it, hold it with instructions. Hold it, I said. I want to see the shape of them before I choose the shape of the house. Very well, he said. He slid one last document into the center of the desk. This is the letter, he said. We won't send it now. We'll keep it in my file. When and if you ask, I'll call them in and read it exactly as written. Not to punish, to record. He turned it so I could see the first line. I recognized my own words. He'd asked me to write them in my ink. To those who assumed my silence meant agreement, I gave everything once. I won't die twice. The rest was boilerplate that didn't feel like boilerplate, fortified with specifics, the names spelled correctly, the dates precise. The education fund would be repurposed at my instruction, the deed would pass to a trust. If I selected that path, the assets would be directed to an entity that didn't laugh when people couldn't breathe. I signed the bottom. Not because I planned to send it today. Because I wanted it ready. Silence is only power if it has a shape to fill. When we were done, Thomas stood again. Walk with me, he said. He led me down a short hall lined with photographs, families in front of houses, elderly couples at long tables, a young woman in a college sweatshirt holding a scholarship certificate. He stopped at a door with frosted glass and opened it to reveal a small conference room with nothing on the table except a glass carafe of water and a bowl of cheap peppermints. This is where I read letters, he said. It's never dramatic. People expect drama. They get policy. And then the truth feels louder. I could see Mark sitting there, Linda too. Jason is spinning a coin with restless fingers. I could hear the phrases they'd choose, confused, unfair, heartless. I could hear Thomas say, no, clear, legal, final. I didn't feel hungry for that moment. I felt the steadiness of being able to choose it. Nora reappeared, efficient as a metronome. Credit freezes confirmed, she said. Safe deposit appointment set at Glenview for 2 o'clock. P.O. box at the main post office reserved under your full name. Keys ready for pickup. Here's a list of banks that still require in-person tokens. We've requested one. And she glanced at Thomas. Then me, the evaluator, can see you Friday at 10 here. Discreet entrance. Thank you, I said. The stack of small, lawful victories should have felt like paper. It felt like armor. Thomas walked me back to the office to collect my things. At the door, he paused. Ed, he said, there is one more thing. Go on. If you are going to disappear, disappear into something. People do better walking toward than away. I'm not vanishing into a hole, I said. I'm moving into a life where the quiet isn't a punishment. He smiled. Good. And when they say you ran, remember, doors are not an escape. They're choices. We shook hands again. It felt less like an end, more like a relay. I took my hat from the chair back, nodded at Nora, and stepped into the corridor. The elevator hummed softly. The numbers counted down like a calm heartbeat, 3, 2, 1. In the lobby, a child tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the big potted plant. She smiled, let him touch the leaves. It's funny the things you notice when you stop bracing for impact. Outside, the light was clean. The city sounded like normal life, someone arguing gently into a phone, a delivery truck squealing, a dog insisting that sidewalks were for sniffing. I breathed in and felt the breath go somewhere useful. Glenview Credit Union sat 2 miles away, brick modest, with a flag that snapped twice in a small wind. The woman at the counter didn't know my grandson's name. She didn't know Mark's or Linda's. She knew only rules and the cost of a key. Sign here, Mr. Miller, she said. And here. I did. The safe deposit box slid out of the wall like a drawer in an old tool chest. I set the trust originals in my marriage certificate, my discharge papers, and the first page of my journal photocopied for date. I rested my hand on the stack for a second, not to pray, not exactly, to witness. Then I closed the lid and heard the quiet, certain sound of a lock. At the post office, the clerk was young enough to be Jason's friend, but had the politeness of someone raised by a grandmother who mattered. "Here you go, Mr. Miller," he said, sliding the small brass key across. "Box 4519. Anything you want redirected." "Not yet," I said. "Soon." Walking back to the car, I took out my phone and scrolled to Frank. "How'd it go?" he asked. "No hello required." "Green knows where to build the walls," I said. "We put up a few. We picked out a door." Frank's laugh sat low in his chest, the sound of a truck engine that still starts at 20 below. "That's my guy." There was a pause. I let it stretch. "You all right, Ed?" "I'm measured," I said. "It feels like the first day I knew which way was north." "Call if you stumble," he said. "I'll be at the corner with a flashlight." We said goodbye without ornament. I didn't drive home right away. I parked by the small public garden. Margaret loved a wedge of green tucked between a pharmacy and a barber shop where old men argued about teams. The tomatoes were staked high. A hand-painted sign read, "Take what you need, leave what you can." I sat on the bench and let the sun warm the spot on my shoulder that still ached when it rained. The lake would be quiet now back at the house. Jason would be sleeping late because consequences hadn't found him yet. Linda would be researching resorts that looked good in photos. Mark would be staring at a spreadsheet wondering why his life never felt like he'd been promised. I took out my journal. On the next line I wrote, "Today I chose ink over noise. Today I chose doors over docks. Today I learned that the opposite of drowning isn't swimming, it's standing on the ground." I drew myself. A breeze moved the page. I let it. When I got home, their cars were in the driveway, but the house felt as if it had adjusted itself 2 inches to the left. Linda's voice floated from the back, arranging a dinner, complaining about someone's salad dressing. Mark's footsteps thudded upstairs. Jason's game muttered through a closed door. I moved through my kitchen without apologizing to it. I opened the drawer where I kept the old keys and took out the one that belonged to the garage door keypad. I held it a moment, then set it back. Not yet. I wasn't locking anyone out. I was locking myself in. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Friday at 10 works. Ask for the side entrance." TG, the side entrance. How fitting. I turned off the lamp over the sink. The house exhaled the way houses do when someone decides something inside them. I walked down the hall, past the wall where Jason's school pictures lived in a lopsided row, past the coat closet where my work parka still hung like a memory. In my room, the lake shimmered small in the window, a coin someone had tossed onto the surface of a life and forgot to retrieve. I loosened the window lock enough to hear it, not for romance, for measurement. That sound had been my metronome for years. It would mark this too. I sat at the desk and stacked the day's keys in a neat line, one to the safe deposit box, one to the post office, one to the house I still owned. I placed Thomas Green's card next to them. Then, with the same care, I slid a clean envelope from the drawer and addressed it to myself at box 4519. Inside, I tucked a photocopy of the letter Thomas would read one day if I asked him to. I wrote on the flap in small block letters, "When ready." I sealed it and set it aside. Then I reached for the journal again and drew a small square door at the bottom of the page. I shaded it lightly, left the outline clean. That was when I heard it. The front door, the slam, not angry, just careless. Voices. Mark's flat. Linda's clipped. A younger voice, Jason's, is restless. The house resumed its old play as if I were backstage. Dad, Mark called, not walking down the hall, just throwing the word into space like a coin into a fountain. "In here," I said. I kept my voice even. He didn't come in. He didn't need me. He needed the version of me he could predict. "Linda and I are thinking of getting away for a few days," he said, still not visible. "You'll manage, right?" "I always have," I said. He didn't hear the sentence the way I meant it. Or he did, and didn't want to. Their voices moved away down the hall like weather you can't control and don't have to stand outside in not anymore. I closed the journal. The lake's small sound kept time. Friday at 10 would come and I would sit in a side room and answer questions from a neutral mind to put a seatbelt on my own. After that, more paper, more locks, more doors not to slam to open. I thought of the handshake that morning not as an ending bell, but as the tap of a baton before the music changes. The room had been drawn. The first pieces had been placed. The pen at last was heavier than anyone's laughter. I switched off the lamp. The hallway held its shape. In the dark, you learn what you can navigate by touch. The walls were where they always were. The doorknob turned like it always had. But I was different in the doorway. The house didn't know it yet. Jason didn't know it. Mark and Linda certainly didn't know it. But the floor beneath all of us had moved. Quietly, legally, irreversibly. Tomorrow I will water the tomatoes at the community garden. I would stop by Glenview again for an extra key. I would bring Frank a coffee and tell him the lawyer had a room with peppermints where truth sounded loud. I would keep my voice steady, my steps measured, my silence shaped. And when Friday came, I would walk through the side entrance the way a man does who no longer needs to be announced in his own life. I left a plain envelope on the kitchen counter where the afternoon sun would find it. Nothing fancy, manila thin with my tidy block letters across the front, for Mark. Inside 3 sheets of paper that meant nothing by themselves. A grocery list, an old lawn care invoice, and a blank check with my name crossed out in heavy ink. It wasn't a trick. It was a mirror to see who still looked when they thought no one was watching. I poured coffee slowly and waited. From the hallway I heard Linda's heels first. Click. Pause. Click. The rhythm of a woman who walks like rooms belonged to her. She drifted into the kitchen in a silk blouse too bright for the hour phone in one hand like a second pulse. She didn't say good morning. She never did if there wasn't an audience. Her eyes landed on the envelope. Mark, she called, voice honeyed on the surface hard underneath. There's something for you. Hold it, Mark answered from the den without getting up. Linda held it. Then she didn't. She slid a manicured nail under the flap like she'd been asked to do it. The paper whispered open. I didn't turn my head. I let my coffee steam fog my glasses a little. The pause told me when she saw the blank check. The huff told me she didn't like the line of thick ink through my name. It's a grocery list, she said, disappointed, and set the papers down too neatly the way people do when they want you to know they touched something and didn't find what they wanted. Jason wandered in last, earbuds all but welded in place. He saw the envelope, glanced at me, then at his mother. What's that? Nothing, Linda said casually. Just a reminder your grandfather needs milk. Jason smirked. DoorDash exists, Mom. Be useful, she snapped. Get it later. Whatever he murmured, already scrolling. I sipped my coffee and let the moment pass. The envelope wasn't a test they failed. It was a measurement where their eyes went when money might be in the air. Not to me, not to the coffee, to the paper. Good. I wrote that down later in my journal. They reach for envelopes, not for hands. By mid-morning, the house thinned. Linda left for Pilates and performance. Mark left for a job that fit him like a coat, 2 sizes too small. Jason retreated to his room, a cave of whispers and LED glow. I cleared the counter the way I always had a habit that felt like muscle memory, and turned on the small kitchen radio Margaret used to keep near the spice rack. The classical station played something patient and unhurried. I took my pillbox from the drawer Monday through Sunday in clear, stubborn letters and set it on the table. One of the things Thomas had said in his office kept echoing, if they call you confused out, document their certainty. The pillbox sat like proof. Each slot is full. Each dose counted. I didn't need to perform competence for my own sake. I needed to for the record. Still, I let my hands move more slowly that morning when I poured water. I let the glass clink a beat too long against the sink. The old part of me hated the performance, the church boy version of my pride, standing up straight, insisting I'd rather die than put on a show. But this wasn't a show. It was a signal in a language my son and his wife had chosen to understand. They didn't speak love fluently. They spoke of liability and convenience. Footsteps on the deck. I glanced up and saw Mrs. Carter, the neighbor from 2 houses over, broad-shouldered and quick with a greeting peering through the screen door like she always had with Margaret, as if the mesh were just an invitation to speak kindly. Edward, she called, tapping lightly. You got a minute? Always, I said, and meant it for people like her. She stepped in carrying a carton of eggs and a jar of something that looked like peach preserves. Farmer's market. I bought extra, she said, which meant I bought them for you in the language of decent people. How are you? She asked, and it wasn't idle. I'm vertical, I said, and grateful. She set the eggs down and studied my face with the kind of attention that makes lying feel unnecessary. I heard the commotion the other night, she said softly, not pressing, not prying. Sound carries on the lake. You know where I am if you need anything. I nodded. Thank you, Ruth. Mrs. Carter, she corrected with a wink she'd used for years. Save the first name for when I swear. Then a beat. You look steady to me. If anyone says otherwise, you send them to me. It shouldn't have hit me as hard as it did, that simple pledge from a neighbor whose only stake was proximity and decency. I felt my throat tighten the way it used to when Margaret would lay a hand on my arm at a party, and I'd remember what home felt like. Do you need a ride anywhere this week? She asked. I'm heading into town Friday for a haircut, 10 o'clock. I have an appointment then, I said, matching her casual tone. Side entrance. She smiled like she understood more than I said. Good, she said, and patted the pillbox gently as she left, as if blessing it. Doors, Edward. Use them. When she was gone, I wrote another line. If they whisper facility, I will answer with witnesses. At noon, my phone buzzed, a number I now recognized without fear. Green Thomas said, 2 quick things. 1, the physical token was shipped. It'll be at your P.O. box tomorrow. 2, we got a ping attempted online inquiry on your education fund. Denied. IP traces to your son's office building. I've noted the attempt. No action yet unless you want me to. I don't, I said, and surprised myself with how calm I sounded. Let them spend their energy on doors that don't open. Very well. His voice warmed half a degree. You sound measured. I am, I said. Thank you, Thomas. Friday at 10, he said. Nora will meet you outside. Side entrance. Copy that. I said a phrase from another life, and we hung up. I set the phone down and watched how the sunlight crawled across the kitchen tile like a clock I could trust. By late afternoon, the house collected its inhabitants again. Mark came home dragging exhaustion like a coat he couldn't take off. Linda kept moving when she talked, like stillness would make her words too heavy. Jason hovered, bored, hungry, full of wants he mistook for needs. Dad, Mark said, hovering in the doorway to my room without actually entering. Small thing. My card got flagged today. Weird timing. Did you change something with the bank? I kept my face open, my tone even. I changed many things today, I said. All of them mine. Linda appeared behind him like a stage direction. No need to be cryptic, she said lightly. It's just easier if we loop you in when we need to help, that's all. You've been looping me in, I said. For years. Jason flopped onto the couch and spoke through a yawn. This is so dramatic, he muttered. There it was, his favorite word for other people's pain. Dramatic. I let it pass like a cloud. I'll make dinner, I said, not as penance as a choice. Something simple. Order in, Linda said. It's faster. I'll cook, I repeated, because sometimes the quietest revolution is refusing to outsource the proof that you're fine. I made pasta with garlic and the good olive oil I only used when Margaret would smile at the smell. The rhythm of chopping settles men like me. It reminds us of small work that adds up to something warm. I salted the water like a ritual. I set the table for 4, not because I wanted company, but because I wanted the record to show I hadn't withdrawn my humanity to reclaim my control. We ate. Forks against plates. The television muttering in the other room about a game I no longer followed. Halfway through, Linda set down her fork, already bored. So she said, casual like a cat, I found a number for a placement specialist. Just informational. These things have wait lists, you know, placement, Mark repeated, as if tasting the word might make it more palatable. Don't be naive, she said, as if practicality trumped compassion on a technicality. If we ever needed to move quickly, I'd rather have our ducks in a row. Jason snorted. Ducks. I set my fork down gently. Say the whole sentence, I said. What? Linda blinked. Her smile tightened. Say it the way you say it when you think I can't hear, I told her. Facility. She inhaled, then exhaled through her nose. We're trying to be responsible, Edward. The last time you tried to be responsible, I said I paid your property taxes. Mark's chair scraped a little. Dad. I raised a hand, palm steady. I'm not angry, I said, and I wasn't. I'm observing. Linda looked away first. That mattered. We're just planning, she said. You're making this adversarial. Planning is good, I said. I do it all the time. Jason rolled his eyes hard enough to pull a muscle. So what, Grandpa? You want us to pretend you're not getting older, that you didn't almost drown, pretend. The word felt strange in my mouth. No. Good, Linda said, seizing the opening like a lawyer. Then help us help you. We could do a tour, just to see what's available. We don't have to commit. Friday at 10, I said as if we were comparing calendars. I have an appointment. I'll be seen. Seen by who? Mark asked slowly. A neutral, I said. Someone who writes letters that say he decides for himself. It was quite a beat too long. I let it be. Linda recovered first. Oh, Edward, no one's questioning you are, I said, not raising my voice. That's all right. I prefer things on paper. Jason pushed back from the table. This is ridiculous, he announced to no one and everyone, and left his plate half full because waste to him was as invisible as effort. Mark stared at the tablecloth pattern like it might provide a map out of the room. We're trying, he muttered. I know I said and didn't add the wrong things. I stood, carried my plate to the sink, and let the water run hot. The sound of it filled the room and gave us all something to listen to that wasn't each other. That night, after the dishes and the small talk, after the television and the hollow laughter from the laugh track, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my journal again. I wrote 3 lines stacked like stones. They want a tour of endings. I booked a confirmation of the beginning. Silence is not absence, it's leverage. I closed the book and turned off the lamp. The house creaked in the places it always did. The lake outside said nothing, which is sometimes the only mercy water can offer. Thursday was a day of errands disguised as something else. I took the long way to the post office by way of the community garden. Tomatoes blushed at their success. An older man with a straw hat and a back brace nodded at me the way men do when they recognize the specific dignity of trying. At the post office, my brass key found box 4519 on the first try. Inside a small padded mailer, the security token Thomas promised, and a single sheet from his office confirming the freeze and the date. I liked dates. They framed the truth, so people couldn't call it an opinion. On the way home, I stopped at Frank's. His front porch had always looked like a staging area for retired determination boots lined up flag-folded neat in a shadow box, a small table with a ring of coffee stains where old arguments had earned their stripes. He opened the door before I knocked. You look like a man with a checklist, he said, stepping aside. I look like a man with a key, I said, and held up the tiny token between thumb and forefinger. Frank barked a laugh. God, I love technology when it makes thieves work for it. We sat. He poured coffee strong enough to clean a carburetor, and I told him about the envelope Mrs. Carter's visit, Thomas's call dinner, and the word facility on Linda's tongue. Frank didn't interrupt much. When I finished, he blew out a breath. You handled that table like a surgeon, he said. No need to swing a bat when a scalpel will do. I don't want to cut them, I said. I know, he said. But sometimes the only way not to bleed out is to stitch yourself shut. He looked toward the lake visible through his back window. You ready for tomorrow? He asked. I am, I said. Side entrance. He saluted with his mug. I'll be parked 2 blocks away. I won't hover, but I'll be there. Thank you, I said, and stood the kind of tired that isn't from work, but from waking up for the first time in years. Ed, he called as I stepped down. You don't owe them a tour, I know, I said. I owe myself a letter. Thursday night brought a storm. Not a big one. No drama to match the houses, but a steady drum of rain against the roof that made the air smell like summer, worried it was out of time. Lightning stitched the sky once or twice. The lake answered with a shiver. Jason was on the phone late, his voice louder because he wanted someone to hear him. It's stupid, he said to whoever had signed up to be his echo. He's playing games. If he were a decent person, he'd just hand it over. It's not like he can use it. Community college is a joke. I stood just inside my doorway and let those words pass through me like a cold draft. Margaret used to say, hurt people pronounce the world wrong, and I finally understood she hadn't meant grammar. I lay down. Sleep came in clips and edits. I dreamed of doors that opened to hallways I'd built myself and of pens that drew maps that matched the ground. Friday morning I woke before the alarm. The house was quiet in the specific way houses are when they don't know what's about to change. I showered. I shaved carefully. I chose a shirt Margaret always said made me look like I'd slept well even if I hadn't. I filled the pillbox for the next week while the kettle boiled. I ate toast. I wrote 3 words on a sticky note and tucked it into my pocket like a talisman. I decide this. At 9:30, I told the house I'm heading out. Mark's voice floated from upstairs, indistinct. Linda said nothing. Jason mumbled something that sounded like whatever. It wasn't a send-off. It was a record that they had been told and I had gone. I drove toward town the way men drive toward something they've already chosen. No hurry, no dawdling, just the steadiness of a hand that no longer shakes for other people's comfort. I parked 2 blocks away like Thomas had asked, near a tree that had broken the sidewalk years ago and never been forced to apologize. When I stepped onto the curb, a truck eased up at the stop sign. Frank didn't roll down the window. He just tipped 2 fingers off the steering wheel. I nodded back. It was enough. The side entrance was exactly where it needed to be. Plain door, small brass plaque bell with a button that clicked cleanly under my thumb. The door opened. Nora Vance stood there, clipboard at her side, smile warm without pity. "Mr. Miller," she said. "Right on time. This way." We walked down a short hall to a small, bright room with 2 chairs and a plant that looked hard to kill. A woman about my age sat waiting with a folder in her lap. She stood when I entered, not out of obligation but out of respect, and she handed to everyone like a habit. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said. "I'm Dr. Shirley Patel. We'll talk for about 45 minutes. It won't be a test. It will be a conversation where I write down what you already know." I smiled. I like conversations like that. We sat. She asked about the date. I told her. She asked about the president. I told her. She asked about my assets, my choices, and my wishes if I couldn't make them. We spoke about Margaret, about Frank, about the pillbox. We spoke about the lake without saying its name. We spoke about Jason without indicting him, about Mark, without excusing him, about Linda, without making her the axis of my life. Halfway through, she said, "What do you want, agency?" I said. "And quiet, that's earned." She wrote that down like it was a medical fact. At the end, she set her pen aside. "Mr. Miller," she said, "it is my professional opinion that you have decisional capacity. I'll send a letter to Mr. Green's office this afternoon for his file. Would you like a copy mailed to you as well?" "Box 518, I said, and we smiled at each other like 2 people who speak the same small language of competence. I stood. We shook hands. It felt like the kind of handshake you give someone at a finish line that's also a starting line. Nora walked me back to the side entrance. In the hallway, I saw the conference room where Thomas would read letters when it was time. It didn't scare me. It steadied me. Paper is a kind of mercy when people try to edit you out loud. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air tasted like metal and possibility. Frank's truck was gone. Good. He trusted me to walk myself home. I drove back the long way. The house waited indifferent and familiar. I carried the quiet in with me like luggage no one could take. Jason looked up when I stepped into the kitchen, mostly because he wanted to be seen not looking up. "How was your little appointment?" He asked the word little, doing more work than the rest of the sentence combined. "Satisfying," I said. Linda's eyes cut to my face. "What kind of appointment? Informational," I said, borrowing her vocabulary and handing it back without fingerprints. Mark hovered uncertain. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Better than okay," I said. "Documented." They didn't know what to do with that word. They didn't like it when the ground rose under someone else's feet. I made tea. I placed the cup on the table. I didn't offer to pour for anyone else. Not out of spite, out of clarity. The day unspooled the way days do when clocks behave. In the late afternoon, the mail truck hiccuped to a stop at the curb. I watched from the window as the carrier placed a small envelope in our box. Linda drifted out, collected it with the rest, flipped through with her habitual hunger, and then, frowning, set aside what wasn't hers. She left the little white envelope addressed to P.O. Box 4518 on the hall table, ignorant or uninterested. It would be there when I left for my walk. I could pick it up then. I had time. Before dinner, I sat with my journal and wrote one line in the middle of a blank page so it could breathe. I am not confusing kindness with access anymore. The house creaked. The lake held its breath. Somewhere next door, Mrs. Carter's radio played a hymn in a voice old enough to remember when people sang to listen to each other. I stood, turned off the lamp, and felt the new weight of the day settle into my bones, not as a burden, but as ballast. When I lay down that night, sleep found me quickly. Not because I was tired. Because for the first time in years, the next morning didn't require me to explain myself to be allowed to exist. Friday had stamped the file. The cracks in the other house, the one down the hall where Mark and Linda and Jason mistook convenience for love, would widen on their own. I didn't have to pry. I just had to stop holding it up. In the dark, I whispered the words I'd slipped into my pocket that morning just to hear them once more before the day ended. I decide this. They turned my drowning into a party trick. It started with a laugh on the back patio, the kind that asks the room for permission to be cruel and gets it. I was in the kitchen rinsing a mug when Jason's voice cut through the screen door like a dare. "Picture this," he said loud enough to conquer the music. Grandpa goes overboard, arms flailing, mouth open. "Help me, help me." A ripple of laughter. A glass clinked. Someone asked, did he say that Jason didn't miss a beat? He said a lot of things, he smirked, mainly water. Another laugh, bigger this time, the kind that invites everyone to be brave by being unkind. I didn't step onto the patio, I didn't interrupt the performance. I stood still, hands wet, and let the sound wash over me without dragging me under. "Tough old man," a boy's voice parroted one of Jason's friends, I guessed. "He's fine." Jason soaked in it. "He's dramatic," he said, and I could hear Linda's smile in the way she breathed out a soft hiss through perfect teeth. I set the mug down gently in the sink, a sound I could control. The lake hummed beyond the yard like a witness who refused to take sides. "Hey," another voice chimed in, female unsure. What if he'd actually..." He didn't. Jason cut her off as if the facts were an inconvenience he was too clever to carry. "Besides, it's not like we don't have plans." He lowered his voice to the volume he reserves for secrets he wants to be overheard. "Once he's placed, Dad says it gets simpler. Paperwork, signatures, that kind of thing. The college fund, the house, there's a flow, you know." There it was, the math of me. I reached for the towel and dried my hands. I could have pressed record on my phone and trapped the sound like a bug under glass. I didn't. I had something better than audio dates times and the quiet certainty of a man who knows exactly what he heard. "Who's hungry?" Linda chimed, as if casseroles could soften a sentence like "once he's placed." "We've got a spinach dip that'll change your life." "Not mine," Jason quipped. "Mine changes when the check clears." Another wave of laughter. Small, mean, and impressed with itself. I turned off the faucet. The house breathed. And I wrote in my head the sentence I would put in ink later. Tonight he performed my drowning for applause. Mark drifted in from the patio halfway through, brought by the scent of garlic bread or gravity. He saw me by the sink and set a hand on the door jamb. "Dad," he said, caution in his voice like he was stepping onto ice. "Son," I answered without turning. He shifted his weight. "It's just..." "Stories," he said, apologetic for something he didn't name. "You know how kids..." "Exaggerate." "I do," I said. I set the towel down. "I also know how fathers correct them." Mark stared at a point over my shoulder. It was a joke, he tried again. It was a joke, I agreed. "They're laughing." I let the sentence stand there, dressed in its certainty, and went back to my mug. He didn't follow me into the rest of it. He retreated back to where smiles were simpler. The crowd swelled, then thinned. Footsteps. Ice clattering into glasses. The sound of someone's song choice getting vetoed with polite cruelty. I stayed in the kitchen and stacked plates that didn't need stacking. You learn after 65 years how to turn your back without giving it away. At one point, the sliding door whispered open on its track. A young woman stepped in ponytail mascara, a touch too heavy for daylight courage. She picked up a napkin, then another, and fidgeted. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, voice careful. "Yes," I said. She hesitated. "I'm Kayla. I'm in Jason's math class. I'm sorry. About what he said. I mean, the lake. It's not funny." I met her eyes. They were the age of honesty before it calcifies. "Thank you," I said. "It isn't." She nodded like someone relieved to be understood, then slid back out into the noise. Not all witnesses clap. By 8, the house exhaled the guests. Linda did her tidy lioness on the savannah routine, moving slowly through the aftermath of the hunt, arranging the spoils, leftovers in containers, compliments tucked under her belt like trophies. Jason disappeared to his room with a bag of chips and a pocket of echoes. Mark hauled a trash bag out to the bins, shoulders sloping in a way that said the weight wasn't plastic. I sat at the table, pulled my journal close, and put the night in order. quotation marks where they belonged. Not because I needed to prove anything to myself, because paper likes the courtesy of exactness. 8:12 p.m. Jason. Once he's placed. 8:13 p.m. Linda. We've got plans. 8:20 p.m. Kayla apologizes. Witness 19-ish ponytail, brown eyes steady. When I finish the facts, I let one more line out. Not big, not dramatic, just true. They carry my stories like currency. I carry theirs like receipts. The next morning, the lake wore fog like a shawl. Mrs. Carter's yard hummed with bees. I stepped out to sweep the deck because it's what my hands do when my head is sorting. Ruth, Mrs. Carter, called from the walkway. Edward, she said, equal parts question and greeting. Ruth? I nodded. She had a canvas tote and the face of someone who'd decided to be brave before coffee. You should know, she said, coming closer, voice low. The kids posted a video last night. Just a clip. Jason reenacting the thing. She didn't say drown. My granddaughter showed me, she added with a small shake of her head, dismayed and unsurprised at once. It made the rounds. Not everyone laughed. I kept my broom moving. The motion let me choose my words. Thank you for telling me. Do you want me to send it to someone? She asked. A pastor, a coach. Sometimes daylight is helpful. I considered. The urge to make proof official tugged like a tide. Then I pictured Kayla's face, brave and new, and the way a small town corrects itself. Not yet, I said. Sometimes daylight finds its way around the block. She studied me, then nodded. For what it's worth, she said, people remember who raised him. They also remember who didn't. People are kinder than I give them credit for, I said. Sometimes. She smiled, not flippant. Sometimes they're just paying attention. When she left, I swept a few more useless leaves and felt the oddest thing, a small lift in my chest that wasn't quite joy, wasn't triumph. Gratitude maybe for the fact that the world had a few more Kaylas and Carters than I feared. By 10, the world had opinions. That's what small towns do with their mornings when given an appetite. Word about the clip trotted down the street, stopped for coffee, made a left at the hardware store, doubled back by the church, and planted itself at the ribbon of shops where Linda bought wine she couldn't pronounce, and pretended the price was subtle. Inside our house, we found our marks. Jason emerged late and loud. So people are freaking out, he announced, head thrown back, smiling like he'd been nominated for an award only he understood. It was a joke. Can't anyone take a joke? Maybe don't post it, Mark said, heavy-lidded, trying for father and landing on tired man. I didn't, Jason said, indignant. Darren did. Or Mikey. I don't control what my friends think is funny. You control your mouth, I said, not from the doorway like a ghost, but from my chair at the table like a man who paid the taxes. Jason glanced at me, a flash of something complicated in his eyes. Was it embarrassment? Annoyance? Mostly he hated being called to the front of a class he thought he'd already passed. He scoffed, swallowed the moment, and reached for cereal like it owed him a future. Linda chose anger with a garnish of PR. This is ridiculous, she said. People act like they never told a story. It's our family, our business. What you do to people in your family is everyone's business, I said, almost gently. Edward. Please, she said, the words meaning, don't make this harder to spin. We have a reputation. You do, I agreed. She couldn't tell if I'd affirmed her or killed the sentence. She moved on. Mark's phone rang. He checked the screen, hesitated, and took the call in the hall. His voice dropped a register. Words like inappropriate and sensitive and our brand floated back like leaves in slack water. He came back different. Not by much, but I know my son's posture like I know the sound of our hinges. Shoulders back, jaw set. A man called into an office he thought he'd left behind in his 20s. What Linda said, reading him the way she reads menus, looking for the safe thing. Someone at work saw the clip, he said. HR wants to touch base about optics. Optics, Jason barked. It was a party. They don't care, Mark snapped, and the snap surprised him. They care that my kid looks like he's bragging about pushing an old man into a lake. Silence. The room met the sentence like a plate meeting a table. It didn't break. It just made a sound you remember. I didn't push, Jason said, defensive eyes sliding. I nudged. He lost his balance. I opened my mouth, then closed it. There's a kind of lie that eats its teller from the inside. You don't have to feed it. Delete it, Mark said, knowing the futility. Call your friends. Tell them to take it down. Jason rolled his eyes. You can't delete the internet, Dad. You can delete your mouth, Mark said again, learning the line a second too late. Linda touched Mark's arm, not affectionately, calculus. We'll get in front of it, she said the phrase like a sparkling bandage. We'll say Dad tripped. We rushed to help. Family joke taken out of context. We'll host a barbecue for the neighborhood. Kill it with kindness. Kill what I asked. She didn't answer. Later, when the house had exhausted itself with plans, I slipped out for a walk. The clouds had flattened the light into something kind, edges softened. I cut through the community garden, nodded at the man with the back brace, and found myself at the benches by the pharmacy. Two older women who knew everything first and correctly second were in mid-handoff of a story. That boy should be ashamed, one said, shaking her head, so the earrings did their small work of punctuation. He will be, the other replied, less as prophecy than schedule. They saw me. For a flicker, their faces did the polite rearrangement of people caught in a sentence with your name in it. Then the first one's silver hair eyes like the good china patted the bench beside her. Mr. Miller, she said, sit if you want, or don't. Just know some of us aren't laughing. Thank you, I said. I didn't sit. I carried the gift away unreduced. Back home, I wrote Thomas a short email, facts only as he'd asked. Neighbors witnessed the video. Witness Kayla apologized. HR ping on Mark regarding optics. I am not responding publicly. Please note, I didn't ask him for advice. I wanted a time-stamped line in a file that would outlive rumor. His reply was exactly right. Noted. You're doing well. Noise tends to overestimate itself. TG noise does. By late afternoon, Linda's counteroffensive had a guest list. Sunday, she announced phone in hand, eyes bright like the problem had become a party she could win. Early dinner. Casual. We'll invite the neighbors. Put out a spread. Remind everyone what a gracious family looks like. Gracious, I repeated, tasting the word with the care I reserve for church and engines. We should try that. She didn't blush. She doesn't. She just smiled tightly. Jason was already texting. I'll invite the guys, he said. We'll tell them it was a bit. Don't, Mark said, surprising himself again. Don't invite them. Why not? Because they laughed, Mark said. He didn't look at me when he said it, but the sentence had weight. And because I have to go to work on Monday. For a heartbeat, the ground between us remembered it used to be shared. It passed. Everything does, Dad, Mark said, turning to me, careful. If we host, could you show your face? Just for an hour. People like to see. See what I wanted to ask. A man who doesn't faint when you clap, a prop that proves you aren't monsters. I chose different words. I'll be here, I said. It's my house. Linda's mouth twitched. Control is a hobby to her. She prefers it cooperative. That evening, Mrs. Carter knocked not to gossip, but to hand me a loaf of bread still warm enough to steam the bag. Too much for one person, she said. So I'm sharing. Sunday, I said, as if asking a question with two letters. You coming? Wouldn't miss it, she said. I like to see how people behave when they're putting on their best. We both smiled in a way that wasn't mean, just honest. Also, she added, shifting her tote. The pastor's wife asked me if she should check on you. I told her you were documented. I huffed a laugh. You are efficient. I'm old, she said. Old people don't waste trips. That night, rain returned without thunder, just a soft insistence like someone tapping at the window to tell you you're not alone. Jason's door stayed closed. Mark and Linda's voices rose once, then fell the way negotiations do when both parties realize they're talking to themselves. I sat at my desk and laid out the pieces of my life as if I were tinkering with a watch token, P.O. Box, key, safe deposit key. I set Thomas's business card beside them, then the small note from Dr. Patel that had arrived while I was out, letter sent to Mr. Green confirming decisional capacity. Take care, SP. I held the note a heartbeat longer than necessary. It wasn't that I doubted my mind. It's that other people found it useful to pretend to doubt it. The paper didn't convince me. It pinned their story to a corkboard where it couldn't wriggle. I wrote in my journal, the video did work, I didn't ask it to do, I didn't need to share it. The lake spoke to the town answered. I will not clap. Sunday arrived with a blue sky that would have looked fake in a photograph. Linda moved through the house like choreography. Napkins folded, lemon slices in water, a playlist she called civility, and I called noise dressed in linen. Neighbors arrived in batches, church hair jeans ironed because of respect. They brought salads with names and desserts with stories. Mrs. Carter arrived last on purpose with a peach cobbler that made rooms forgive each other. She hugged me the way old friends do, no padding, full arm, a weather report, and a promise. Edward, she said softly, we'll be around if you need anything. Ruth. I nodded because sometimes gratitude is better folded than worn. The patio filled and the performance began. Linda laughed at a volume calibrated to sound effortless. Mark told a funny, tired story about an office printer. Jason leaned against the railing phone in his back pocket, face up like a fisherman, showing he wasn't hiding bait. Glad you could all make it, Linda said to a circle who had made it on purpose to see who they were when they tried. We wanted to make sure everyone knew Dad is fine. He tripped. It looked worse than it was. Family joke got misunderstood. Eyes slid to me, curious, measuring. I held my coffee and met them back with the calm of a man who knows he doesn't owe a demonstration. I'm vertical, I said, and a few laughed gently because they wanted to. Jason couldn't help himself. And dramatic, he added, boy who must stick the landing. Jason Mark warned, not unkind, not strong enough. That's when a small twist did its work. Kayla from the party walked up with her mother. She looked at me, first asked permission with her eyes, and I gave it. She turned to Linda. Mrs. Miller, she said, polite and firm in equal measure, I was there. It wasn't a joke. The circle went quiet the way circles do when truth steps in uninvited and refuses dessert. Linda's smile didn't crack. It hardened. Sweetheart, she began, you know how stories... It wasn't a story, Kayla said. It happened. He fell. And people laughed. Her mother touched her elbow, proud, protective, a little scared of the sharpness of young honesty. We just wanted to say, she added to soften, we're sorry. Mr. Miller. She looked at me. Some of us didn't laugh. Thank you, I said. It was enough. They moved on. The air changed a few degrees. Conversations reformed with different centers of gravity. If you've ever watched a flock of birds correct course without bumping, you know the feeling. Linda's eyes found me across the patio. Not rage. Calculation. How do I repair this while I still look gracious doing it? She raised her glass anyway. To family, she said, and half the patio joined, because you can shame people into toasting if you do it brightly enough. To witnesses, I said under my breath, too low for the performance, loud enough for my coffee, and took a sip. After the neighbors left, after the last hug that meant we see you, and the last plate scraped into the trash like a confession. Linda deflated, not visibly. If she has a god, it is the appearance of control. But something in the spine softened. Mark loosened his tie. Jason retreated upstairs with a slam he considered punctuation. In the quiet, Mark said, Dad, do you want me to... talk to him? You should, I said. Because you're his father. He nodded as if reminded of his job description. He didn't go upstairs. He went to the sink and turned on the water instead. Some men fight by washing dishes. Linda stood by the slider, staring at the lake like it owed her mood. We did our best, she said. You saw that, right? I saw you, I said. She searched my face for the grade. She found none. She left the room with the feeling of a woman who got a B on a test she wrote herself. I sat down tired in the way that only comes from watching people choose who they are. I opened the journal and made the day small enough to hold. The mockery left the dock and walked to town. It came back alone. I set down the pen. The house groaned, an old creature settling its joints, and the lake breathed like a sleeping animal. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt verified. Verified is quieter. It lasts longer. That night I slept without the edits. No dreams about doors, no choreography, just rest that came the old-fashioned way, earned by doing the next right thing and letting the wrong things find their edges. In the morning, a small white envelope waited on the hall table, box 45-118 in neat print. Inside Dr. Patel's letter on clean letterhead, a single paragraph that read like the steady hum of a good machine, Mr. Edward Miller demonstrates decisional capacity. He understands the nature and consequences of his financial and healthcare decisions and can communicate his wishes clearly. I folded the letter and placed it with my keys and token. I didn't need to brandish it. I needed it to exist. In the kitchen, Mark's phone buzzed. He picked it up, listened, and murmured, "Yes, of course." His face relaxed a fraction. "Thank you," he said, and hung up. "Optics?" I asked. "Better," he said. For now, I echoed the phrase, tasting honest. Jason tramped down the stairs, hoodie up like penance. "I'm going out," he said. "Where?" Mark asked, hovering halfway between father and roommate. "Campus," Jason said. "Financial aid office. I want to make sure everything's set for next term." I sipped my coffee. The cup didn't shake in my hand. "Good luck," I said. He stared at me as if to read whether I knew something he didn't. He didn't like that mystery. He left in a huff of cologne and youth. I looked out at the lake. It was flat as a lie told to the right audience. The mockery had spread. It had done its damage. It had also done its work. I didn't have to memorize this part. The rest would write itself on letterhead in ledgers on faces at doors they used to open without knocking. I turned the page of my journal and drew a line down the center. On one side I wrote noise. On the other hand, proof. Under noise I wrote video, party, spin. Under proof I wrote witness, letter, locks. Then I closed the book and went to water the tomatoes. Jason didn't knock. He hit the front door like a verdict and came in waving a plastic folder stamped financial aid. His face was the color anger makes when it remembers it's also afraid. "We need to talk," he said, tossing the folder onto the kitchen table so hard the papers slurred. I was already sitting there. Coffee. Pillbox. Dr. Patel's letter was folded once and placed beside my keys because I like objects that do exactly what they promise. "Morning," I said. "This isn't funny, Grandpa." He jabbed a finger at the papers. "They said the fund isn't accessible. They said there's some token now. They said I need owner authorization." "What is that, security?" I said quietly. "A seatbelt." He blinked like I'd spoken another language. "You set this up. Why would you make it hard for me?" "Because it is mine," I said, "and because you are not." The sentence landed. He tried to laugh it off, a short bark that had no friends. Mark drifted in late to his parenting. "What's going on?" Jason turned the folder into a flag. "They're blocking the fund." Linda came next, pulled by the smell of conflict like it was fresh bread. "What do you mean by blocked?" she asked, stacking worry over calculation. "It's for school. It's in my name," I said as calmly as I would have named a road. "It has always been in my name." Jason slammed his palm onto the table. "Then sign it over." Mark's eyes flicked to me and away. He didn't say please. He didn't say, "Don't talk to your grandfather like that." He said nothing, which was its kind of sentence. Linda tried a smile. It felt like a receipt. "Edward, honey, we're just trying to keep things smooth. If the school needs an authorization, we can bring something by." Jason printed forms. She rifled the folder and produced a sheet like a magic trick. Across the top, temporary custodial access. Across the bottom, a line for my name. "Don't," I said, and I didn't raise my voice to say it. "Not that form. Not in my house." Jason scoffed. "Why are you being difficult?" "I'm being exact," I said. I slid Dr. Patel's letter over and tapped the paper with one finger. "I can decide. I will decide. I will not be decided." He read the words the way boys read instructions to get to the part where they can ignore them. His jaw set. He pushed the letter back like it had burned him. "This is ridiculous," he said. "It's my education. Don't you care if I succeed? I care if you learn what success costs," I said. "And who pays for it?" He made a noise, a hybrid of laugh and choke. He stepped back and paced, because anger needs to move to feel like progress. "So what, you're punishing me? Because I had fun at a party? Because you—" "Jason," I said. And the name came out different this time, not as a plea, as a full stop. We stood in the same kitchen where he once dragged a stool to reach the cookie jar because he wanted to surprise me. Now he wanted to surprise me into compliance. We were both disappointed. Linda pivoted. "Look," she said brightly, "we're off track. This is just paperwork. If we sit down, we can do it right together. The last time we did something together, I said I drowned for your entertainment." Silence. It walked into the room as if it had a key. Mark rubbed his temple. "Dad, please, don't say it like that." "How should I say it?" I asked. "We're a family that thinks other people drowning is a joke. We're a family that tells stories louder than facts." "No one is telling stories," Linda said too fast. "Kayla is," I said. "Brave ones." They froze. "It is difficult to weaponize denial when the town has eyes." Jason's mouth curled. "Who cares what she says?" "People who want to hire you," Mark muttered, the HR call still stuck to his ribs. "Enough," Jason snapped. "Just sign the damn paper." He shoved the form at me, and I did a thing you only learn how to do when you've lived through harder rooms than kitchens. Nothing. I let the paper hang there in the air like an accusation without a place to land. He dropped his arm. He wasn't used to gravity winning. "Not this," I said again, and then I stood because some sentences require you to be vertical. I took the form, folded it once, then again, and slid it under my coffee cup. "I won't sign convenience. If one day I support your education again, it will be to reward character, not to subsidize contempt." Jason laughed, a short, mean sound he'd learned somewhere that didn't have my fingerprints on it. "You act like you're some saint. You're just a stubborn old Jason," Mark barked, too late, too soft. I turned away before the rest of the sentence happened. "You don't have to listen to profanity to know it by scent." I rinsed my cup and set it in the rack. When I faced them again, they had rearranged into a different geometry. Jason furious, Linda offended, Mark terrified of the Monday already in his inbox. "Here's what's true," I said. "You have asked me to give you access. I have said no. You have my answer. I will not argue it." "You'll regret this," Jason whispered, and for the first time in weeks, I heard the boy he used to be the one who feared consequences because he had only just learned the shape of them. "I already regret a great many things," I said. "This isn't one." He stormed out because doors are props when you want to perform control. Linda followed with a hissing, "We'll talk later." That meant we'll scheme when the witness is gone. Mark stayed. He sat. He looked at his hands. "I don't know how we got here," he said. "I do," I said softly. "One small, uncorrected thing at a time." He shut his eyes. "I'm trying." "Try the right thing," I said. "Try at being his father." He nodded once as if someone had awarded him permission to attempt a difficult task. The house breathed in the kind of quiet that makes clocks loud. I carried the folded form to my room and put it under a paperweight Margaret bought at a yard sale, blue glass, a bubble trapped inside like a tiny planet. It felt correct to keep a false request under something transparent and heavy. My phone buzzed. "Thomas Green." "Ed," he said without preamble. We had 2 more pings. Same office IP, same inquiry. Denied. "Also, this will make you shake your head. Someone called the custodian and asked how guardian status is established." "What did they hear?" I asked. "That without your consent or a court order, it isn't," he said. "My team added a note to your file. All queries route to counsel. No movement is possible without me knowing." "Thank you," I said. "One more thing," he added. "A welfare check request came into the local PD this morning. Anonymous caller. The phrase elder neglect was used. They may stop by. Don't be alarmed. Be documented." I smiled into the receiver. "I have my papers on the table and my windows open," I said. "They can smell the bread Mrs. Carter brought. It will confuse their story." Thomas chuckled. "I like you, Mr. Miller. I like doors that lock and open when I choose," I said. "Monday," he said. "If you're ready, we can call them in. I have the room with the peppermints at 2. You can be elsewhere." I didn't answer immediately. I looked toward the lake and thought about the way light changes when you turn it on without warning. "Call them," I said. "Tell them it's time to hear me without me." "Done," he said. "I'll send formal invites. Nora will handle logistics." "Thomas," I said before he hung up. "Make sure there's water on the table." "There always is," he said. When we disconnected, I felt a small, unusual thing, relief that wasn't about escape. Relief that felt like clean paper. At noon, 2 officers knocked, not the slam of authority, the courtesy of public servants who know where they are. Mr. Miller, the older one, asked a woman with hands that looked like they belonged to a gardener. We had a call expressing concern. "Mind if we step in?" "Please," I said. I gave them what they needed: my name, my date of birth, the neat rows of my pillbox, the letter from Dr. Patel, and the card from Thomas. I did not feel indignation or shame. I offered facts like sandwiches enough to eat, not enough to stuff. "Do you feel safe here?" she asked. "I feel documented," I said. "And I feel prepared." Her partner, a younger man whose uniform still felt new, nodded at the letter. "This is what we like to see," he said, almost apologetic that the world required it. They walked through the kitchen. There were no smells of neglect, only garlic and good olive oil. No piles of unpaid bills, only a ledger with tidy columns. No signs of confusion, only a pen that still worked, and a journal with a line so freshly written it hadn't finished reflecting light. "Silence is leverage." "Thank you for your time," the older officer said. She handed me a card. "If anyone pressures you, call. We don't mediate families, but we protect citizens." "I know the difference," I said. "Thank you for yours." When they left, I stood for a long moment by the door and let the weight distribute. Mark watched from the hall. "What was that?" he asked, pretending he hadn't heard the part he needed to. "A welfare check," I said. "From someone worried I might be alone with my own decisions." He swallowed. "We didn't call." "Someone did," I said. He rubbed his jaw. "I'll talk to Jason." "Good," I said. "Use your words." He almost smiled. Almost. In the afternoon, the town worked on its hobby again. I went to the barber shop because it's where men go when they need to sit among opinions and leave with an easier neck. Old radios, older jokes, a mirror that doesn't lie because it's too tired to. Ed Joe the barber said, snapping the cloth with a soft pop. "Chair 2. He didn't ask about the lake. He asked how I liked my sideburns because craftsmen respect the dignity of small questions. The man in chair 1 said to no one, kids these days, and then to me, "Your tomatoes looked good last week." We discussed soil water and the way you have to tie a plant to a stake so it can choose to reach it. When I paid, Joe slipped me a little extra change like a kid. "Take Mrs. Carter a soda," he said. It was the kind of thing barbers do that doesn't matter and matters. On the way home, I stopped at the community garden. The sign still said, "Take what you need, leave what you can." I watered the bed Margaret loved. A young father pointed out basil to his daughter, and she rubbed the leaf and said, "It smells like pizza," and everyone smiled because truth told correctly can be adorable. I wrote in my head again, when the lake gossips, the town prays. Sometimes softly, sometimes by bringing basil to a neighbor who didn't ask. Evening brought the weather. The sky grayed down without malice, and the first drops marked the deck with small coins. Linda moved through the living room, rearranging coasters like chess. Mark took a call on the back steps, the kind of call that requires you to stare at a distance. Jason stayed upstairs, and the house breathed easier for it. At 6, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Carter stood with a Tupperware of chicken salad and the expression of a woman who believes in lunch as a bomb. "No one should be hungry while feeling feelings," she said, handing it over. "Ruth." I said, "How did you know?" "Because I'm old," she said. "Old people know when not to leave you alone." She glanced past me and caught Linda's shape. She didn't change her face. She looked back at me. Sunday was something she murmured. "It was," I said. I liked the girl, she added, meaning Kayla. "Honesty looks good on people." "It does," I said. "If you need me Monday," she said elliptically. "I'm home until 2. I make a decent witness. The court taught me that when I was 25 and madder than God." I smiled into a category I didn't know she held. "Thank you," I said. "I think I'll be elsewhere. But knowing your porch exists helps." "It does," she said, and left. Linda waited until the door closed. "Why is everyone suddenly—" She stopped herself. "She is smart enough not to say 'on your side' out loud." She tried a different complaint. "It's like people are trying to make this bigger than it is." "It is exactly as big as it is," I said. She stared at me and found nothing to grab. She went to rearrange a vase. Mark came in from the steps and said to no one, "HR wants me to send an email." No one asked him what it should say. He looked at me and for once didn't expect me to draft it. He walked to the counter, opened a laptop, and tried to write his life correctly. Upstairs, a door opened. Jason patted down and stood in the kitchen doorway like a boy asking for a ride. He held his phone by the corners as if it were evidence. "I told them to take the video down," he said, not looking at me. "Most did." "Good," I said. He waited for a prize. When none arrived, he shifted. Financial aid said I can appeal, he added as if the word would open a wallet. You should, I said. Appeal to the part of you that used to hand me dandelions and call them flowers. He flinched. The kid who had existed for such an unreasonably short time raised his head for a second and then disappeared back into structure and pose. Whatever he muttered, but it didn't carry. He went back upstairs and the silence he left behind felt less victorious than correct. At 8:30 my phone buzzed once more. Nora. Mr. Miller, she said, brisk in the way only kindness can afford to be. Formal notices have been sent. Monday 2 o'clock. Conference room A. I will greet your family at the reception. Thank you, Nora. Do you need arrangements? She asked. Do you want me to call a car? Sometimes distance feels helpful. I'll walk, I said, which wasn't true, but felt right in the mouth. Very well, she said. One more thing. Dr. Patel's letter is scanned to your file. The officers who conducted the welfare check also filed a no concern note. It's unusual to have such a tidy folder. Mr. Green appreciates tidiness. So do I said. When we hung up, I stood at the window and watched the rain decide whether it wanted to be serious. It settled on thoughtful, and the lake took it with dignity. I opened the journal and wrote the shortest entry I'd made in months, Monday 2 o'clock. Peppermints, truth. I added a second line, water on the table. I closed the book and turned out the light to see if the room remembered the shape of me in the dark. It did. The house did too. Even the lake, which had once tried to make me its story, stayed in its bowl and minding its waves. Sunday night slid into Monday morning like a seam stitched by a careful hand. I woke before anyone else and made coffee strong enough to put a spine in paper. I put on the shirt Margaret said made me look reliable even when I didn't feel it. I placed Dr. Patel's letter and Thomas's card in the inside pocket of my jacket, not because I needed them at 2, but because they were part of the ritual of choosing yourself in private before anyone asks you to do it out loud. At 9, Mrs. Carter's radio floated a hymn across the hedge. Be still my soul. I am not religious in any way that requires membership, but I have always respected sentences that are both order and comfort. Mark came down with a tie that understood it had one job. Linda came down in a dress that made a point. Jason came down last hoodie up, face young, in a way that would have broken me if I hadn't learned to call things what they are. Where are you off to? Linda asked, not curious. It wasn't the information she wanted. It was posture. An appointment, I said, with who Jason asked as if he'd learned nothing from the week. A room with peppermints, I said. And then some water. They stared. I smiled. I picked up my keys. If anyone asks, I said, tell them I'm busy being exactly who I am. I left by the side door. The house watched me go the way houses do when they suddenly realize you've always had another exit. The rain had stopped. The town was drying itself in the sun. On the way to the car, I passed Mrs. Carter on her porch. She raised her glass soda bottle as a benediction. I tipped my imaginary hat. At the curb, I paused a beat and listened. Not for sirens, not for laughter, for the small, everyday noises that mean a life is happening and doesn't need permission, a dog insisting on being understood, a truck backing carefully, a child arguing with a zipper. The world hadn't shrunk to fit my drama. That's the mercy of it. It had stayed the same size and somehow still made room for me to be exact inside it. I put the keys in the ignition. The engine turned. The clock said there was time. The day said there was room. Monday at 2, waited in an office where paper would win because paper remembers the order it was written in. I drove toward the place where the truth would be spoken in the soft voice of policy, with peppermints in a bowl and water on a table and without me in the chair. I never believed revenge would taste like silence, but as I sat in the corner of my living room that evening watching the clock tick toward midnight, I realized how much power there was in restraint. My house. My house, though Linda liked to parade around as if she already owned it, was buzzing with the muffled laughter of her friends. They thought it was theirs to occupy, to drink in, to trample through, as though the walls held no history, no weight of memory. But every laugh, every careless footstep only made me calmer, because I knew what was coming. Linda walked past me once, balancing a glass of red wine, her heels clicking across the hardwood. She didn't even look my way. Mark trailed behind, carrying 2 bottles of champagne, his face flushed. He was never much of a drinker. That night, though, he let Linda push the rhythm. He was falling in line, a willing accomplice, though his eyes betrayed unease. "Jason's on his way," Linda said to him, not even lowering her voice. "He'll love this. A real housewarming." Mark grunted, glancing at me, then away quickly. "Maybe Dad doesn't want. Dad doesn't matter." She cut him off sharp as a knife. "This place is practically ours." I didn't speak. I just shifted slightly in my chair enough for the old leather to creak. That sound was the only reminder to them that I was still there, still listening. When the crowd left around 2 in the morning, I heard Linda's laughter echo through the empty hallway. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, staring at me. Mark was behind her, tugging at her arm as if to pull her upstairs. But she wanted to deliver her little performance. "You really should get some rest, Edward," she said, swirling what was left of her wine. "It can't be good for your heart staying up this late. Don't you worry, soon enough you won't have to." I didn't answer, just looked at her steady long enough that her smirk twitched. Mark muttered something, "Linda, let's just go," and they disappeared up the stairs. The next morning I walked out onto the porch. The air was sharp, early autumn chill brushing against my skin. Nora spotted me from across the street, waved, then crossed over with her usual brisk energy. Frank followed, carrying a folded newspaper. "You holding up?" Nora asked, her eyes scanning me like a nurse checking vitals. "I've been worse," I replied, half smiling. Frank handed me the paper. "Heard some noise last night. Thought maybe the whole neighborhood was invited except us." "They were Linda's friends," I said evenly. "Mark went along with it." Nora pursed her lips. "And you just sat through it?" "Of course," I said. "It was her stage. I wanted to see how far she'd dance." The three of us stood there for a moment, quiet except for the rustle of leaves. Frank finally cleared his throat. "You sure you don't want us to?" "No," I cut him off gently. "Don't worry. They think I'm fading. They think I'm harmless. That's exactly what I want them to believe." Later that week, Thomas Green came by. He wore that same calm expression, briefcase in hand, always precise. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table Margaret and I had eaten at for 30 years. "Everything's in order," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "The transfer of ownership for the apartment on 5th Avenue has already been filed. Legally, it belongs to the trust. Linda can't touch it." I nodded. That little apartment, a 2-room place I bought years ago as a rental, had been one of the first assets I moved. Margaret always called it my rainy day corner. She was right. "And the house?" I asked quietly. Thomas gave a thin smile. "Still yours, Edward. For now. But when the time comes, it will pass exactly where you want it to." I sat back, folding my arms. "They're making plans already. Linda treats it like her castle. Mark," he looks at me like a piece of old furniture in the way. Thomas leaned in. "Do you want me to push forward with the next step? Public notice?" "Not yet," I said. "Let them write the script in their heads. Then I'll change the ending." That evening, Mark came into my study. It was rare. He avoided the room, saying it smelled like mothballs. He lingered at the door, hands in his pockets. "Dad," he began, his voice uncertain. "About Linda, about last night. She gets carried away." I looked up from my desk, met his eyes. "Carried away into treating this house like hers." He flinched. "She didn't mean it like that." "Yes, she did." I let the silence hang until his shoulders slumped. "And you let her." Mark's jaw tightened. For a moment I saw the little boy he once was, desperate to please, afraid to disappoint. But then Linda's voice drifted down the hallway, calling his name, and his expression hardened. "I just want peace, Dad," he said. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I almost laughed, but it came out as a sigh. "Peace. You think peace comes from giving away what isn't yours to give." He looked away. "You'll understand eventually." Then he left. 2 days later, Linda cornered me in the kitchen. No Mark this time, just her leaning against the counter, her eyes cold and sharp. "You know, Edward," she said, "you should consider moving into something smaller. A retirement community, maybe? This house is a lot for you to manage." I set down my coffee cup. "Funny, I manage just fine." Her smile was thin, practiced. "You don't want to burden anyone. Mark and we're starting our lives. Jason will need space too when he's home from college. Think of it as practical." I let her finish, let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I said softly, "You should be careful, Linda. Sometimes when people think they're walking into an inheritance, they're walking into a trap." Her smile flickered. "Just for a second." Then she straightened. "You won't be around forever, Edward." "No," I said, "but my decisions will be." That night I wrote a letter, just a few sentences folded neatly sealed. Not for Linda, not for Mark, for Jason, my grandson who thought it was funny to watch me struggle in the lake. "You may think cruelty makes you strong," I wrote, "but cruelty is a debt, and debts always come due." I slipped it into an envelope and placed it in the drawer of my desk. Someday he would find it. The days stretched into weeks. Outwardly, nothing changed. Linda hosted dinners, Mark hovered between guilt and compliance, and Jason stayed absent. But beneath the calm surface, pieces were moving. Nora whispered updates from the neighborhood. Frank helped me store boxes quietly in his garage, and Thomas Green waited for my signal. Every smile Linda offered, every smirk Mark tried to hide, it all fed the fire inside me. Not a wildfire, a controlled one, slow, deliberate, patient, because they believed they were writing the story of my ending. But what they didn't realize was that I was only halfway through, and the next chapter was mine to tell. At 2:00 p.m., I wasn't in the room where my life was being read. That was deliberate. If you want a clean cut, you don't hover over the scalpel. I chose the luncheonette across the street from Thomas Green's office, chrome edges, 2 good pies under plastic domes, a waitress who called me Sir and Han in the same breath. From my window seat, I could see the side entrance Thomas prefers for days like this, days when truth should arrive without a parade. I set my journal on the table pen, on top a cup of black coffee standing guard. The glass of water in front of me caught the late light and settled my hands the way a steady horizon does. At 1:56, my phone buzzed. Nora Vance. "We're set. Table water. Peppermints in a bowl." At 1:59, Linda first. Mark is behind her. Jason last. He took a peppermint. I smiled without showing teeth. Peppermints are a policy in sugar. They remind people they're not here to win. They're here to hear. At 2:01, the phone buzzed once more. "Mr. Green is reading now." I put the phone face down and watched my breath go in and out like a metronome. I finally tuned. I wasn't praying. I was choosing silence like a man chooses solid ground. Thomas's voice doesn't rise when he holds a room. It's honest, not dramatic. That's why I hired him. "Good afternoon," he began. "I'm Thomas Green. Mr. Miller asked me to read a letter into the record. This isn't a negotiation, it's a statement of fact." "Where is he?" Linda asked. "She doesn't like schedules. She didn't build. Unavailable by choice." Thomas answered. "Shall we begin?" He unfolded one page, the one I wrote in my hand and signed beneath his lamp, and read, "To those who assumed my silence meant agreement. I gave everything once. I won't die twice." Nora told me later that Mark shifted in his chair like the line had weight. Jason rolled the peppermint to the other side of his mouth. Linda crossed one leg over the other and sat very still. "Control prefers statues." Thomas continued, steady as a mechanic listing parts. "You turned my patience into a surface to skim. You made my breath a story to laugh at. Here's the record." He set the rubric on the table and walked them through it. "The fund. The education fund you called yours is not yours. Effective last week, it was repurposed in full to the Margaret Miller Scholarship for first-generation students in this county. The custodian lists it as paid. If you ask for access, you will be denied. If you attempt to bypass my client, the log will include your name." Jason sat up. "That's not legal," he said. "It is," Thomas said calmly and turned the page. "The apartment. The rental apartment on 5th was transferred to the trust my client controls. Its net income will endow the scholarship annually." Linda exhaled just once, a hard, low sound. "He moved an asset," she said, "to the air, to the ceiling, to whatever God protects entitlement. The house. The lake house remains Edward's until he dies, or directs otherwise. The deed and instructions are executed and held in escrow. Upon his passing, the property will transfer to a community land trust that prioritizes veterans and working families, or be sold for the same purpose at his discretion. This house will not be a trophy." That one landed. I felt it across the street. There is a frequency of grief and greed shared. It hums. Authority. Medical and financial powers of attorney are executed. In the event of incapacity, decisions rest with Frank Dawson. Failing him with counsel. Do not call facilities on my client's behalf. Do not call banks. His credit is frozen. His accounts require a physical token. Every inquiry pings this office. Mark cleared his throat, an old small gesture from when he once tried to tell the truth early and never practiced. We were trying to prepare, he said. Thomas lifted a second sheet and laid it beside the first like a diagnosis people hope is wrong. Dr. Shirley Patel examined Mr. Miller on Friday. Her letter, Mr. Edward Miller, demonstrates decisional capacity. He understands the nature and consequences of his financial and healthcare decisions and can communicate his wishes. You had him tested. Linda said, a clean edge on the word tested, as if my mind were a misbehaving appliance. He asked to be documented, Thomas said. We obliged. Then he read the last part. I wrote it in short lines so breath would do the work. You may call this cruel. It isn't. It's clear. You may say I owe you. I don't. You may try to contest. If you lose, you will receive nothing per the no contest clause you've just triggered by threatening to call a lawyer in the lobby. Jason leaned forward, boy and man indecisive in the same body. Tell him he's going to regret this, he said. Thomas looked at him the way a carpenter looks at a bent nail. No, he said. I'll tell him he is done regretting the wrong things. He closed the folder, pushed the water toward the center. Peppermint, he offered. Nora said the bowl barely rattled. Linda stood like the room had offended her. Mark stayed seated, holding the glass he hadn't sipped. Jason flicked the candy back into the dish and walked out with his shoulders arranged as if the corridor might give points for posture. The water didn't spill. Policy has good hands. At 2:37, Nora texted read. Done. At 2:41, Thomas, all as expected. They'll email. We'll file. I answered neither. I looked at the diner's pie and didn't order it. I listened to my breath. It stayed steady without permission. At 2:49, the phone rang. Green. It's done, he said. His voice has the softness decent men leave room for. Responses track with type. Linda wanted PR, Mark wanted a reset, Jason wanted a fight. You got what you wanted, record and distance. Thank you, I said. I meant more than the letter. One more thing, he added. The foundation director sent a note of receipt and a line you'll appreciate. We know what courage looks like at 17. She didn't name the student. She didn't have to. Kayla, I said, and let the name rest like a tool in a box. I suspect so, Thomas said. Anything else for today? Yes, I said. Hold the deed instructions until I move. And Thomas Water on Monday was the right call. It always is, he said, and we hung up the way good professionals do, cleanly. When I got home, the house had arranged itself into a fight it didn't want. Linda stood at the kitchen island with a legal pad and a pen. She clicked like punctuation. This is ridiculous, she said, as if forming the syllables correctly could rewrite the law. Will appeal. There has to be a path. To what I asked. To a bank that reads minds. To a doctor who lies. She glared at me the way people do when the most insulting part of a sentence is its accuracy. You don't get to make us look like villains, Edward. You don't need my help, I said. Her mouth went thin. Control doesn't like direct light. Mark sat at the table, elbows on knees, not looking at either of us. He had the shape of a man who finally found the gap between what he meant to be and what he became. Dad, he said quietly. I don't know how we got here. One small, uncorrected thing at a time, I answered. You still have time to correct something. Like what? His voice was a boy asking for a list. Like your son, I said, and we both heard the echo of the day on the dock. Jason came down the stairs loudly on purpose. So that's it, he said. You threw away my education. No, I said. I moved it from the bank to people who value it. He laughed without humor. You mean that scholarship? That's charity. It's an investment, I said. Into kids who help pull someone out of a lake, not tell the story at a party. He rolled his eyes. It's a teenage reflex that looks pitiful on a grown face. You want me to apologize? He asked, leaving room for the smallest of easy miracles. No, I said. I want you to improve. The apology is for you. He snorted. Whatever he said, heading for the door. Darren knows a guy. Every Darren knows a guy, I said. Not many know how to keep their name clean. He slammed the door because slamming is cheaper than listening. Linda scribbled a line that didn't connect to any plan. If you think you can cut us out, I don't think, I said. I filed. Mark stood, then sat back down. His hands rubbed his face like a man washing in a river that wasn't there. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now I said I stopped subsidizing a lie." He looked up confused. "I'm moving," I said. "Next week." Linda's pen stopped. "Where?" "Silver Pines," I said. "They have a garden, a workshop, and people who say, 'Please' and 'Thank you,' as if those words still work." "You can't just leave," she said. "I can," I said, "and I will." "And this house?" Mark asked. "It's mine," I said, "until it isn't." "You'd kick your family out," Linda said, horrified in a performative way. "I'd stop paying for a performance," I said. "You have 14 days to make other arrangements. After that, the locks change. You're adults. Figure it out." "You can't," she began. "I already did," I said. We stood there, 3 people in a kitchen with a history that refused to lie. For a second, something gentler tried to enter. Mark almost said something true. Linda almost chose humility. Jason almost came back for a second chance. Then the moment passed. The house went back to its weather. Packing at 65 is different than packing at 30. You don't throw things into boxes, you decide what earns the right to take your breath. I started with the small. Margaret's flannel. The photo of me holding a boy who once brought me dandelions and called them flowers. The paperweight she found at a yard sale, blue glass with a small bubble inside that looks like a world that stayed intact. My journal. The letter from Dr. Patel. Thomas's card. The safe deposit key. The token. Frank came by with 2 cardboard boxes and a humor that kept its voice down. "I brought the fancy tape," he announced. "The kind that pretends to be stronger than it needs to be." "You always did like overkill," I said. "Overcare," he corrected. "There's a difference." We packed in companionable silence. At one point he held up the old guitar Jason No Jason, Names Don't Lie in Wood, had once strummed badly and earnestly. "You taking this?" he asked. "No," I said. "It belongs to a boy who's not here." Frank nodded and set it down gently, as if gentleness could do retroactive good. Mrs. Carter appeared in the doorway with chicken salad and the expression of a woman who refuses to let grief skip a meal. "Label your boxes," she said, handing me a marker. "Men always think they'll remember. They don't. I'll write big, I promised." She looked at the stack of papers on my desk, saw the edges of law and decision, and touched the top page with 2 fingers. "Monday," she said, not asking. "How'd it go?" "Water stayed in the glass," I said. "That's all right then," she answered, as if we were discussing a pie that didn't fall. The night before I left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the house around me quiet in a way I hadn't allowed it to be in years. I had written a letter for Mark and left it under his favorite coffee mug. He would find it when he went looking for caffeine and instead meet his father's handwriting. "Son," I wrote, "I wanted an easier sentence here. There isn't one. I love you. That's not a payment plan. If you want to find me, choose decency first and let it grow for a month. Then knock. If you come as a man, I'll answer as your father. For Linda, nothing." She would interpret any letter as an opening. For Jason, I took out the envelope I'd written earlier and added 1 line in the white space I'd left on purpose. "Strength isn't how loud you laugh when someone is drowning. It's how fast you kneel." I sealed it again and set it with the receipts that would outlast rumor. Before bed, I walked to the dock. I didn't go to the edge. Survival is not a hobby. I stood where wood meets dirt and listened to water do the only work it's ever promised, move forward while reflecting what's above it. Margaret used to say that meant something. Tonight it did. Morning arrived like a reliable friend, on time, no fuss. I made coffee strong enough to have an opinion. I cleaned the sink because a sink deserves to be found clean. I left a list on the fridge, not requests, not ultimatums. Transfer the utilities by the 15th. Return the spare key to the glass bowl. Forward your mail. There's a kindness in clarity when you've taken kindness for granted. The suitcase wasn't heavy. The boxes would go to Frank's for a week before Silver Pines took the ones with book spines and pictures. I wore the shirt Margaret liked because it made me look like I had slept even when I hadn't, and because you should honor exits. At 8, I set my key's house box and token in a line on the table, then put the house key back in my pocket. Not yet. At the door, I paused. The house had watched me for decades. It could handle one more look. I didn't expect anyone to stop me. That was the point. But Mark came down the stairs just as I put my hand on the knob. He was unshaven and honest in a way men only are when they've run out of rehearsed lines. "Dad," he said. I turned. "Son, you're going," he said, as if naming it might shrink it. "I am," he swallowed. "Can I—" He didn't finish. "Some things don't have grammar yet." "You can try again," I said. "Not today, but you can." He nodded like a penitent who finally found a church that wasn't selling him something. He opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I know," I said. "Make it useful." Linda's voice landed from upstairs, sharp as ever. "Mark, where's the—" She stopped when she saw me caught between performance and surprise. "Leaving so early," she said. "On time," I said. She frowned. "We'll talk." "No," I said. "You'll listen. Someday." I opened the door. Mrs. Carter was on her porch with a glass bottle of soda, and Frank's truck idled at the curb. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. He knew how to greet a man who chose his door. "Need a hand?" he asked when I reached the step. "I've got it," I said. "But ride shotgun." He grinned. "I like to supervise." I set the suitcase in the bed of the truck with the care you give anything that has lived near your heart. Before I climbed in, I turned back once more. The house stood exactly where it always had: same angles, same stubborn windows, same roofline. Margaret called it a good hat. It looked smaller, or maybe I had finally stood up straight. We pulled away slowly. No need for drama. It had burned itself out. 2 blocks down, my phone buzzed. Nora, Mr. Miller, the foundation's director, asked if she could send you a note. A student was nominated early for the first award. The essay was called "Say It When It Counts." "Envy Kayla," I said aloud. Frank glanced over. "What's that, a kid who told the truth when it was heavy?" I said. He nodded like he'd met a few. "Good." We drove out past the grocery store where everyone knows which bread you buy, past the barber who cuts hair like he's fixing something, past the park bench where I learned to end sentences. The town held. It didn't blink. It had room. Silver Pines wasn't a sentence. It was a choice. Clean hallways, a workshop that smelled like cedar, a garden plot with a sign that read, "Row 7 open." The manager handed me a key without making a speech. "Welcome home," she said, like the phrase should be short. In my new room, I placed 3 things first. Margaret's flannel on the hook by the door, the paperweight on the desk, and the photo of a little boy on the sill, not as an invitation for nostalgia, but as a caution. The silence here was different, not the punished kind, the earned kind. I set my journal down, opened it to a blank page, and wrote the smallest entry of my life. I chose this. Then I underlined it and closed the book. The phone rang once more. "Thomas, your son emailed. Thank you for being clear. Saving for file. TG." I stared at the line until it focused. There are sentences you wait your whole life to hear. They seldom arrive the way you pictured. They count anyway. I walked to the window. A man in a straw hat staked tomatoes 2 plots over. A woman with a walker paused to admire him and then kept going. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed the way people do when no one is being graded. I sat. I breathed in. The breath didn't ask anyone's permission to keep going. Back at the lake, there would be echo and pace and the small theater of people who must be loud to believe themselves. Here there was a different volume, the sound of a room that agreed with my choices. I didn't close my eyes. I didn't need to. I looked at the door I had just opened and let it stand. Doors are best used, not admired. I poured water into a glass and set it down without spilling. Then, because it mattered to me and no one else, I said it out loud one last time so the walls could learn my voice. I gave everything once I said to the clean air of a chosen place. I won't die twice. The room held it. The world moved forward. And the rest, letters, locks, peppermints, a scholarship on good paper, would do its quiet work while I did mine. I picked up the pen and began again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.